Hey everyone, it's Cindy Lawrence. I have another Copic coloring video to share with you today using Power Poppy's newest digital stamp set called Vital Rose. This digital stamp set, you can get it in, when you purchase it, you can print it out in either a gray ink or a black ink. You can print it with the sentiments or without. And for mine here, I chose to print it without the sentiments with the gray ink so that I could color it in the no lines coloring style. And all that means is when you're done coloring an image like this, it really looks more like you painted it there because you don't see those hard black lines. Even though that's a beautiful look, this is just a different look. It takes a little more patience to do a no lines coloring image. It takes a little bit longer before, usually before you're happy with how it looks. So my first color here is BV00. I'm going to be coloring this rose mostly in the BV family, blue violet. That's a color of rose that you don't see very often in nature. They actually have to crossbreed them to get the purples, but they do exist. And it's one that I just really love to do. Purple is such a pretty color for a rose. And I'm not a big fan of bright purples, but I really do like this blue violet color family. It's got some more gray in it. So I'm going around each petal into the shadow areas of each petal, and I'm adding some of this BV00. Originally, when I started coloring this, I was thinking this might be my lightest color, but once I got coloring it, I decided that it really needed a lighter shade, which is what I've got here, which is my BV quadruple 0. So that's BV0000. Very, very light color. So that's the color I'm coming in and I'm blending out towards the white areas. I'm leaving a little bit of white on the edge of each of the petals. I'm going to keep this particular rose very pale in color, with just the dark colors being in the shadow areas. So I'm continuing to go and just pull out that BV00 with my BV quadruple 0, just blending it out towards the white of each petal. And you don't have to work it very much with this color family. It really blends very nicely. That's something you learn. The more you play with your markers, the more you play with colors, the more you'll realize which ones blend easily and which ones you have to work a little harder to get to blend. This particular family is an easy one, and one of my favorites too. So I'm continuing to just soften those edges by pulling that color out, paying attention to where some of the folds of each of these petals might be also. So I'm adding a little bit to the outside edge as well, and just keeping the very top of those folded over petals nice and white. You could spend a really long time coloring a flower like this for sure. There's a lot going on. You could also do it fairly quickly. This particular variation that I'm coloring here did not take me that long to color. So now I'm going to come in with my darker shade, which is BV02. And that's more of my shadow color. So initially I thought BV00 would be my lightest and I would go darker from there, but I chose to use BV quadruple 0 as my highlight color. And then as I got darker, I realized that each color was maybe not quite dark enough for me. I like a lot of contrast. So this BV02 is still not the darkest color that I chose. These first three shades that I've used are all in the same natural blending group. They're all blue violet. They all have a 0 as the first number. The only thing that changes is that last number. So I went from quadruple 0 to 00 to now I'm using 02. So the only difference here is how light or dark the color is. So I've kept them all pretty bright blue violets and just gone darker with each color. Very simply staying in the same natural blending group. And here I'm just paying attention to some of the little folds and creases that may be on the outside edge of the petals. Now here I am adding in a little bit of gray to this flower, really getting in the shadows with a BV25. I've gone from the natural blending group that all has a 0 as the first number to this marker which has a 2 as the first number. And that 2 is simply just a little bit grayer than the 0. It's not quite as much pure color. It has a little bit of gray in it, which is perfect for shadows. So I'm just poking into all those little shadow areas, deepening those shadows, helping to set them back a little bit. That's what's going to give this flower some real life and dimension and help it to really pop off the page. So now I'm baby stepping my way backwards, as you know I like to do, with each of my colors and just blending at the edge where it meets the previous color. So I've gone from the BV25, which was the darkest one, back to the BV02. Just going to blend that out. Everywhere I put that, I'm just going to blend it out, pulling towards the highlight. Always just pulling that color towards the highlight. One of the dangers of doing this is you can really go too far each time you add a darker color. And as you're pulling that color towards your highlight, you can make your highlight smaller and smaller and smaller until you don't have one anymore. So you want to be very careful about that. So I continue to work my way backwards. Now I've got my BV00. Just blending out, softening those edges. I've had many a student lose their highlights by going too far. Just continue to blend that out. And as I go, I may see other areas that I want to add a little more shading to. That's going to happen on an image like this. There are lots of petals, lots of detail. Just continuing to blend that out. As I got closer to the finish of this rose, you can see I got a little more particular, started adding in some detail there, paying attention to all of the shadow areas, all of the little details and folds and things. You see a lot more the further you get into coloring it. You start to see things that you didn't notice when you were looking at the whole image. Okay, now we're back to our lightest color, which is the BV00. And just blending that out, softening all those edges. The other thing you want to be careful about when you're blending with your lighter color is not to go over your darker colors too much, because you can cause them to lighten, and oftentimes when you do that, it will lighten in a way that is very blotchy and mottled. You may have noticed that before when you've done some blending. If you overblend it, it will start to look really mottled, and then it will start to fight you. And it's not good when you're fighting your own colored image. I've done it many times. So just softly blend this out. See, I'm still leaving some white space on each of those petals. just leaving a white highlight there, still keeping the rose very light in color. Now here I've got my 0, my colorless blender, and I'm just going to come in very lightly over each of the white areas and just quickly do a blend where the white meets the lightest purple color, the lightest BV. Just blending it out, softening any hard lines that I see. If you're doing this and you don't see any hard lines, then you don't need to use this. Just give it a quick blend. And here, that little spot right there that I was just working on was a little place where one of my inks had gone outside the lines up into the next petal. So I used my colorless blender to clean that up a little bit. And here I am doing it again. You want to do it just a little bit, let it dry, and then come back in and do it again. If you continue to blend with that colorless blender too much, it will start to push itself into some of the other areas and make a bigger mess. So here I've pulled out my BG 000 marker, and I've added some pretty blue to this. Don't be afraid to go in and add another color into your flower. This just really makes it come to life. And the blues and purples are right next to each other on the color wheel, so they're nice analogous colors. They don't compete with each other. It's not going to stand out too much, but it will just enhance the flower a little bit. It'll give it kind of a bit of a storybook illustration feel almost. And I'm just blending that in with the previous color. And since I put this color on right after I did the colorless blender, it's going to blend really nicely already. So now I'm moving on to the leaves, and I'm starting with G40. That's a really pretty pale green. I always call that the pistachio family. I think that's because the next one up, the G43, is actually called pistachio. This one is called dim green. It's an original name. So I'm just putting a nice base coat of this pale green on each one of the leaves and the stem. And as you can see, because some of these leaves are so tiny, I've got my brush a little more straight up and down, really using the tip. A lot of times people ask me when I do these videos, why do I have both caps off my marker? So I try to remember to mention it. I take the second cap off the back of my marker because markers sometimes will blob on your paper, and if you take the back cap off, that equalizes the pressure and it prevents that blob of ink from coming out. It's usually the darkest color at the end of your project, the worst possible time, the worst possible color, and the worst possible place. So I just take both caps off most of the time just to prevent that from happening. So here I've got the pistachio marker. This is the G43, and I'm adding some of that veining and shadow area to the leaves. I've left a nice light colored vein down the middle of that large leaf. So I'm adding some shading. I put quite a bit of this G43 down. When I have 3 shades, such as the G40, the G43, and the G46, which is what I'm going to use on these leaves, the middle color is the color that the leaf actually is. So that would be the G43. The G40 is my highlight color, and the G46 is my shadow color. So here we are, have my G46. I'm going to come in and make some nice deep darker shadows in there. One side of my leaf will be more in shadow, and the other side will be more in highlight. That will give it a little more realism, a little more depth. I'm being careful to leave the white veining down the middle and on one side. And the veining on the opposite side will be this nice dark green. And I'm going to do the same thing on the smaller leaves. I'm not leaving a white vein down the middle of them because they're so tiny. I'm just doing a little bit of nice dark shading, mostly on one side, and definitely up underneath the rose where a shadow would be cast. And right there where those leaves curl out. And then following the stem underneath the rose and then down that left side. And now I'm doing a little bit of blending with my G4-3, baby stepping my way backwards through the colors. Just blending that G4-6 out. Excuse me. All right, continuing to blend here. One of the things I see happen sometimes is people get frustrated that their image doesn't look pretty. There's usually an ugly phase in the middle. You have to get through it. You have to keep on blending and adding those layers of color. It takes a little bit of time, but it's well worth it. So you can see, now that we've colored this whole image, that those lines kind of disappear with that light gray ink. And that just gives it this wonderful painterly effect. It is definitely one of my favorite techniques. If you have not tried no lines coloring, print off a simple image with the light gray ink and try that. Don't start with something that's really super complicated. Start with something small and work your way up. I think you'll find you'll really like it. So here I've got my G40 and I'm just continuing to blend, softening any hard edges that I'm seeing, unless I want them there. If you want a good hard line, like down the middle of that big leaf, then don't smooth that out. Don't blend it out. All right, so some quick blending there. Now here I am adding some YG01 into my leaves, especially the bigger leaf, some in the middle of the stem, anywhere where I think a little bit of light might hit it. And then I'm going to even put it on some of the petals of the rose. And that's just really going to take it to the next level. It kind of mimics a little bit of highlight from the sun. And now I've got my colorless blender, once again, my 0. That's never very far from me. And I'm just blending out the edges, softening it up a little bit. And on the leaf, I'm doing that with a G40 rather than a 0. The G40 was the lightest color that we started with. Okay, so I've gone back and I've decided to add a little more color here. I put a little bit of blue violet into a couple of my leaves. And since that is such a gray purple, it didn't work out as nicely as I would have liked. So I ended up kind of covering it up a little bit with the green marker. I kind of just smoothed it in so it wasn't quite as noticeable. You could probably do that with a little bit of a brighter purple. It's designed to be a reflection of the flower onto the leaves, but I just decided that I didn't really love the blue violet in the leaf, so I did go back and kind of cover that up a bit and smooth it out. So you can see that leaf is really starting to take shape, starting to look a lot more realistic. As I go through and really pay attention to the veining. You can see the white veins, or those light colored veins, really popping out in there, and that's really bringing that leaf to life, giving it some nice dimension and good contrast as well. You want the contrast on your leaves to be equal to the contrast that you have on your flower. That way they look like they belong together. So I'm just continuing to blend. Anywhere where I see little areas that need a little bit of help. And once again, I've come back with my G46 and decided to really increase the depth of the shadows. Really increasing the veins, the darkness of it on one side as opposed to the light on the opposite side. And when you add those nice pops of that dark green, it makes all the difference in the world. Amazing contrast. Brings it right to life. You can almost smell it, right? All right, I'm doing a little bit of blending. I don't want to do too much because I don't want to blend out that beautiful, nice contrast I've already put down. Sometimes I tend to go back and forth too many times, and therefore I end up over blending. There should be a club for us over blenders. I do tend to fuss with things a bit. Okay, I really am almost done with this flower. Oh, found another spot that needed help. And what happened here was that's where I put down that blue violet, and I really was trying to smooth it out and blend it in so it didn't look too muddy. I mean, green and blue violet together, yeah, what did I think they were going to create? All right, so here I am going to start working on a background. I've started by pre-soaking my paper a little bit away from the image with my colorless blender. And now I'm going in with my W1 marker, and I'm being careful to kind of outline the image so that I don't color over it. And then I'm lightly flicking towards the colorless blender. And you can see that I'm only doing a small section at a time. If I tried to do the whole thing all at once, that colorless blender that I put down ahead of time would most certainly be dry by the time I got back there. And here I just come back in with my colorless blender and add one more bit to the edge and then go on to the next section. Again, I'm outlining my image to be careful where that ink goes. I have a lot of light petals up there. I don't want to color over them with a warm gray. I'm just keeping that right in the background. Very simple background. I could have done a complementary color, which for purple would be like a yellow, or you could even do something orangey. Yellow is the complementary color to purple, but this is a blue violet, so you could go towards the orange family for that, and that would really make it pop and be vibrant and fun. But I was making this for a dear friend who just had surgery. She actually just had surgery today, So I wanted it to be a little more subdued, not quite as loud. So I chose to go with warm gray. But I am going to jazz it up a little bit more. You'll see in just a moment. So I'm just working in those small sections, laying down that warm gray. The trick here is to really lift up, have a light touch at the end of your stroke so that it blends out, fades out into the white much more easily. This technique is called fade to white. And again, going over it one more time with my colorless blender, pre-soaking another section, outlining the image, filling in any areas around it. I'm being very careful around my image. I don't want to muddy it up with warm gray. And now I'm flicking as I get out towards the outside edge and blending it one more time with my colorless blender and pre-soaking that last section. You might notice each time I go around, my sections get a little bigger as I go. That's because I get less and less patient. And I'm flicking from the image out towards the white area. Nice light flicks, not creating a bunch of little lines, but using the side of my brush and coming back in with my colorless blender one more time to soften the edges. And here I decided to go around one more time with my colorless blender. As I watched it dry, I decided it needed to be softened a little bit more. I could have started with a W0, which would have been easier to blend, but I wanted it to show up a little bit more. So here I've gone back to my W0, and I'm going to add a little bit of that, starting where it meets the W1 and flicking it out into the white area. That'll just give it a little bit of a softer transition from the flower to the white space around it. And then blending again with my colorless blender, softening those edges. And then I decided I wanted to give this background a little more life, so I've gone in with a few different shades that I already have in the flowers and the leaves, and I'm adding some dots and speckles all around. And I've kept them pretty light. This one was BV quadruple 0, and now I've got BV double 0. And if at any time I do this and I decide the color is too much, I can go back with a lighter color right over the top of it and soften it down a little bit. Now remember that nice vibrant green I used in the highlights on my roses and also on my leaves? I'm doing that color as well. That'll help tie it all together. And then here's one of my leaf colors, my G43. And now some W1. And I'm doing quite a bit of that and doing larger dots, kind of squishing the nib into my paper a little bit, and that will help soften some of those other colored dots that I've already put down. And now I've jumped up to a W2 and added some more on there so that they'd show up. Remember, my base color was W1, so you want to have something a little bit darker so that it will show up. Just making a nice speckled background. Then the last thing I did was I let this dry, and then I came in with my 0, and I really went to town dabbing over all of these colors, and it just kind of modeled them together, and it just kind of gave it this cool, almost ethereal background. Don't be afraid to experiment a little bit. And if you're nervous about it, then I recommend doing that before you spend all the time coloring your image. So I'm just continuing to kind of speckle that, soften those colors together, and that's it. Thanks so much for watching today. I hope you enjoyed the video and you learned something new.